Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Herrera. I'm the Communications Officer in Marfin. I want to give you the welcome to this webinar. The subject today is of a lot of interest, and it is a pleasure to have you here with us to talk about the water quality in the Mesoamerican reefs and the sanitation initiatives in Honduras. We want to comment that this webinar is going to take place in Spanish, but if you want interpretation in English, there is the option through the Zoom platform by clicking in the interpretation controls and then choose the language that you want to listen to. If you want to listen only to the interpreted language, you can click on mute original audio. We want a space of learning and respect. Please turn off your microphones and cameras. We think that you write your full name, your country, and your organization in the chat. If you have any questions, you can also write them down in the chat in the space designed for questions in Zoom so that we can monitor them and tell them to our speakers at the end of the session. For the people in the Facebook Live, you can send your questions through the comment section. In the end, we will have a space for questions and answers. Lastly, we want to establish that the opinions expressed in this webinar are only responsibility of the speakers and do not represent Marfin's opinions. It is my pleasure to present the speakers of today from Coral Reef Alliance. Dr. Antonella Rivera, born in Honduras, is a recognized marine scientist with more than 14 years experience in the study and conservation of marine ecosystem. She studied in the Autonomous University of Honduras and at the University of Oviedo in Spain. Her vast investigation evidence with 28 scientific publications is centered in artisanal fisheries communities and aquaculture systems in Europe and Latin America. She has worked in Coral Reef Alliance in the Western Caribbean since 2017, combining an interdisciplinary focus with novelty strategies to address the conservation necessities of coastal communities. We also have Tania Amaya. She is an environmental engineer whose experience and passion are focused in creating solutions for sustainable development. Her studies in engineering and her master's in geoenvironmental technologies in the Polytechnic University of Madrid and her specialty in strategic planning of the Polytechnic University of Valencia have opened the doors to work with different institutions like the National Water and Sanitation Institute and the Tourism Ministry, and collaborating in the Association of Caribbean States based in Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, she is the director of the Coral Reef Alliance. Pamela Ortega is also joining us. She is management director in Bay Islands in Honduras. She was born in Tegucigalpa. She has loved being in nature since she was a little girl. After becoming an environmental engineer in the south of Honduras, she worked with remote communities, and later, after vacationing in the Honduran Caribbean, she is now dedicated to marine conservation. She enjoys community work and strengthening nonprofit organizations, unifying different community sectors to work together and protect coral reefs. Again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being here. We remind you to please turn off your microphones. And thank you again, Tania. The time is yours. Perfect. Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you, Marfin, for organizing this webinar. We know that we have a lot of time of wanting to share the story that we have in water quality and sanitation. I don't know if we can share our presentation. I see that it's loading, and we are very thankful for having all of you here. I know that there are a lot of organizations that have also worked with us, some others that might be just getting to know us. Okay. Oh, I lost the presentation. And there's always a little bit of technical difficulties in these types of events. Okay, so first we just want to tell you a little bit of the organization while we load the presentation. The organization was born 30 years ago. Last year, it was our 30th anniversary, and we were created with the mission of saving coral reefs. We know that this is a monumental mission, and it is not something that we can do by ourselves. It is always necessary to work through alliances, as our name states. Many of them also working with you here, and this story is not the exception. If we can go to the next slide. There we can see a little bit of the work that we do and what is our approach. We don't have it currently in Spanish, but basically what we do, we focus on working a lot with science. It is a lot that you will see in this presentation, and applying it so that we can inform through decision-making processes and also in investment. That's part of what we do. We also get that technical assistance training for communities in many of the places where we work. We have two big programs where we work, one in the Western Caribbean, also known as the Mesoamerican Project, and in Hawaii. We also think about the growth. So right now, these are our two main or strongest points of work. And now think about the points in the Mar. We have some actions in Cozumel and Belize and in Honduras and the Bay Islands and northern coast. Many have been part of the Clean Water for Reefs initiative. In the end, we know that joined to all of the actions where we reduce the threats is something that can help us achieve towards to a more adaptable and resilient reef. Next slide. Here we can see a little bit more of the timeline of the strategy for clean water for the reef. It is something that it seems very recent, but looking back in 2006, Coral started working with the Western community to identify the ways to improve their water quality and sanitation. In this period of time, there were many objectives, many interesting goals from the creation of the Polish Water Association. I know that is a name that is ringing around a lot, if I'm not mistaken. There was a webinar based on the water treatment plant in West End, and Marvin has had a lot to do with the hand of Coral and Polos and the Summit Foundation and other donors, so that it can be taken to operating the treatment plant and now optimizing the processes and the investment. And I know it's a success story that is very interesting that we all really like to talk about and share. And further along, my colleague Pamela is going to talk to you a little bit about it. We also can't start talking about investment in sanitation without first understanding how water quality is behaving. And it's in 2013 when Coral started working with BICA for these monitoring efforts in Honduras. Now in Honduras, we support this system of monitoring in Utila, in a way as well in Guanaja. That has been an initiative of BICA. In Tela, we have worked very, very closely with Amatela so that we can start the monitoring. And we are also doing it in Cozumel. This was then reinforced, fortunately, in 2021 with the project of regional monitoring of water quality. And it's something that Antonella is going to be giving more details about, but it is a fundamental role getting to know the situation of the whole Mar regarding water quality, and that goes hand in hand with the work that we do with a lot stronger efforts to work with mapping of the necessities regarding governance, infrastructure, and finally complete that baseline of what the the picture looks like regarding water and sanitation and what interventions are necessary. If we go to the next slide, we talk about a very interesting event that enforces the necessity to collaborate. And it was the Water Quality and Reef Protection Summit in Roatan in March of 2024. This moment was very important because it was the opportunity for sharing the findings of this regional monitoring of water quality, but also talk about the lack of technical assistance and an investment regarding water quality and sanitation. And it was a convergence of donors and from the public sector, co-managers, and have a stance more aligned and consent regarding investment and work regarding sanitation and water quality. And we left with that purpose of joint efforts to receive funding, but also identify the best way to share the information and work together to work for to implement new policies and laws. We know that there is a big abundance of these strategies, but we are lacking in the implementation. Also thinking about investment and how we finance this project to make them real. And now Antonella is going to tell you a little bit of what this project was a little bit more about, and I leave you with her. Thank you very much, Tanya. Good afternoon to everyone. I now want to comment about this project of the Regional Water Quality Project in the Mar. So to begin, why we decided to do this project, many of us know about the Healthy Reefs report card. And in these report cards, in the one of 2022, what we were able to see was that macroalgae were duplicating in the last 15 years. That is an incredible value. And the way it's increased is what the graph shows us. The red point is where there's almost a 60% cover of macroalgae. And what is the problem of having these macroalgae? These compete directly with corals. So more macroalgae means less coral. And also, many, many times, these macroalgae are controlled by bottom-up controllers regarding water quality. And this means that worse water quality means more algae. And this lack of water quality interferes with all of the life stages of corals. So it is affected by two ways. And other than that, as well as affecting corals, there's also a loss of biodiversity. And now we are losing our biodiversity. Something that is also very important is that sometimes you can think that it's only an ecologic problem, and it's also an economic and a public health issue. So when we have chemicals and particles that are in water quality, it is a risk for human health and their livelihoods. So as we mentioned before, our name has the name Alliance in it because that is the most important thing. And when we talk about this project, we want to make it very, very clear that it was the work of a network of partners. We have different types of partners because it's a very big project that we needed to have very different support and help. So the support partners are the organizations that are the donors and the partners that are in each of the countries that are in charge of collecting the data and do the analysis and analyzing the data. We also have strategic partners and socialization partners. Next, please. So for the collection of data, here we have a map of the places that we took samples from August 2021 to September 2022, one sampling a month in 3 countries, 90 sites in all of in Mexico, Belize, and Honduras. 45 sites were close to the beach, and others were um, close to the reef. Mm. So the deliverables of the project, so the products we needed to have, we have a database with over 35,000 data, a regional baseline creation for all of the region, and we determined a protocol for water quality or how to monitor water quality. And this is the first time where we are unifying throughout all of the countries, taking into account that each country is different and have different needs and have different capacities. So the protocol is focused on how we can compare the data, both temporal and spatial. And we also did 2 campaigns of water quality to make sure that the data is taken properly. And we also developed an infographic and 3 national executive summaries. Okay, so what is the state of the water quality in the Mar? We all ask this question. So the answer that we can give you is oof. We did many analysis that we will look at in detail, but we are here presenting a trophic water quality label. When we started using this methodology, it used to be worked with in more subtropical waters where there are more nutrients, and it takes into account nutrients, oxygen, and chlorophyll. And there are 6 levels out of the 90 sites, 87 sites were degraded. Only 3 are in the fair state, which is where we want to be. So even though we knew that water quality was not going to be optimal, we did not expect results like this. If we see more in detail, the data on nutrients, more information on the Healthy Reefs report card, we see that for nitrogen, both ammonia and nitrates, they are distributed throughout the whole Mar. Each dot is the average for each site. So if you can see, ammonia is distributed in many sites, but we can see that there is a dominance in a southern place of the sun, so Belize and Honduras. In nitrates, we don't see it with so much intensity, but we do see it more in Belize and Honduras. And this usually takes place in places that are close to river ends. And phosphorus, which is also something that we didn't expect, we see a lot of high levels in the north of the sun, in the Mar, so Mexico and Belize. So what is calling our attention in the phosphorus level is that for phosphorus in the Caribbean or in Caribbean islands or in Curacao or in Trinidad and Tobago, we see that the values are 2 magnitude orders lower than what we have here. So these levels are very, very high, and that we need to try to understand what is happening here. And the important about nutrients is that all of these nutrients are feeding the algae. They are feeding the algae, and this is why we are having overgrowth of macroalgae. We also were looking at turbidity and oxygen because corals need clear waters to live in. Because if we start filling with sediments the water, we can start asphyxiating them. It can be very, very terrible. So all of the sites throughout our samples all present high values of turbidity. Also, 64% of the sites had only fair levels of oxygen. And we use the word fair, and we think it's not that bad. But the problem is when we contrast them that we had before in the 90s or before, the studies that were done for water quality, they had averages of 9 milligrams per milliliter. And now we have 16.8 milliliters. So we can clearly see that we are still in a fair level, but we need to take action before we are at that point where there is no turning back. We also have values of chlorophyll as an index of nutrients, and they were taken all of the sites and they were very, very high in all of the three countries, especially in more touristic zones. For example, Cancun, Cozumel, Plasencia, Utila, places that are close to tourism activity. And then we talk about pathogens. Regarding pathogens, we talked about Enterococcus and Torocoliforms. And these pathogens are very important because they can affect human health. About 74% of the samples had a presence of pathogens. And on itself, it's not that bad, but because it can be different types of pathogens. But when we see the values of the unacceptable values of, of pathogens, we see that 7% have unacceptable values of Enterococcus and 17% had unacceptable values of total coliforms. And as I mentioned, this poses a threat for all the people that are in the water or live close to the water. Finally, we sometimes we hear that the solution to contamination is just diluting the sample. It is something that we constantly hear, and what we wanted to show with these tests was to test the values, the paired values from coast and reef, and there is a very strong correlation with these for all of the sites and all of the countries. Also, we have an example of just one site, which is in Belize. We can see that the places with circle are the beach sites, and the other ones are the reef. And many sites close to the beach that have poor values of phosphate are also sites that have fair values on the reef. So the reef is receiving this contamination. We are not losing the contamination. And what calls our attention is that for pathogens, initially, we did not consider taking this data on the reef because they have a very short lifespan. We didn't think that these pathogens would arrive all the way to the reef. However, in the rainy season, you can see that even in the reef, you can see these unacceptable levels of pathogens, both Enterococcus and coliforms. So to summarize what we have been talking about of the results of the regional project, what is this data saying? The important is that all of the SAM is impacted by high values of nutrients, both nitrogen and phosphorus. We also saw that the south of the Mar, there are high values of pathogens that may affect human health. And in the north of the Mar, we have high values of phosphorus that we need to know a little bit more where they are coming from. Finally, we can see high contaminants in the reef. Our reef is suffering from the impact that is happening around them. They are not immune and they need to be protected. So why we did all of this data? So in Coral Reef Alliance, we believe that we need data-based management. Science is not only for creating science, but we need to be able to use this data for proper management. So with all of this partner alliances, we worked on making infographics and we did all of these summaries country by country, um, talking about the different themes and the challenges. And we also had sessions with the partners, and many of these topics were corroborated in the summit that we talked about, and to see what it is that we can do with these data. And what we saw in all of the sites as a summary is that we have very high levels of contamination, and what the partners are seeing us and the people in the field is that we need to take measures immediately and collaboratively. We have seen that we need that all of the members need to be a part of this process of the data of the decision making process. And I don't want to move talk too much because my partner is going to talk to you a little bit about this next. Thank you, Antonella. So the initiatives in Honduras have been with different approaches and also taking into account the appropriate conditions to be able to address these problems of water sanitation. As mentioned before, we have worked in the sector for more than 15 years and also taking into account the resources of the organization throughout this time. So for this presentation, I think I'm going to focus in the most recent um, and in the success stories that we've seen. So one of the tools that has been developed that you can find in our webpage is a digital portfolio that is very useful for communities and organizations or any person that is in the area, especially based in Honduras, but where you can find resources and information that is useful to replicate and adapt and use as reference in your different locations. So, what information do we have in this portfolio? It's very, very extensive and complete. Here I have, I like that we have the logos of all of the partners because, as mentioned before, this is really a collaborative effort. And we have all of the partners, like, for example, like SANA, the National Aqueduct of Honduras, CONASA, which is the potable water services, Polos, which we have mentioned before, also Vika, if there's anybody else here in Vika, based on water quality, Solitur, which is an organization, a government organization that also destines funds to water and sanitation projects, especially in the Bay Islands. And we have organized this information in different blocks. One is the legal framework, which is all of the laws regarding water and sanitation, as well as protected areas and territory, environmental, forest information, any information that relates to the sector. Here we'll have laws, uh, the different agreements, health codes, even lists in Honduras where you can do water quality tests. Another blog is the slates for service providers for quality controls, client service, any sort of format that can be useful for any provider that might not be applying it or might not be using it or may not have the reference to use. And this can be their first approach to start adapting depending on their operation. We also have good practice manuals, like guides, processes, and procedures. Um, in this blog, there is a lot of document regarding related to Honduras, with a lot of guides and procedures of better practices. And lastly, the educational manual, books, publications. We also have a lot of them in our webpage. You can click and you can have a tour of the water treatment in West End. Another tool that we have generated is the management catalog. It is a synthesis of the most relevant aspects of all the models And the information then, other than only integrating different techniques, is also based on interviews and exchanging experiences with different providers of the region that were selected according to the recommendations from our partners. And they were selected because they have very close relationships with different providers on a national level. And here there is a little formula that is not super simple, but it's very correct, is that when a provider is strengthened and a multi-sectorial collaboration leads to successful management, can lead to have this result. And we have this map, the map of Honduras. For those of you that are not familiar with the map of Honduras, and these points are all the providers that were part of the process of the creating of the protocol of this catalog. This was a very, very big exercise that we would be very interested in replicating in other countries, especially those that have an influence in the Mesoamerican Reef. Thank you. So very, very short information on these management models. We have many different types of models. For those that are Hondurans, they know about the different examples that can be in Honduras. For example, here in Honduras, 70% of the management is decentralized. In this case, we have Aguas de Zipateque, Dimatela, Tela, Aguas de Trujillo, Trujillo. In this model, the services are provided by a governance scheme with funding independent to the municipalities. This is very important because if we compare for example, the direct municipality, in which in this case all of the administration, all of the charges of the service enters to an account for the municipality, and this is how there is no segregation of the different costs of the service and the technical part. In the direct municipal, the technical part tends to be very reduced personnel, and they share responsibilities with other areas of interest. So sometimes this limits the way the service is provided. So that we see a lot in the Bay Islands. So going back to the decentralized municipal strategy, amongst its benefits, a little bit more ergonomic administrative strategies, participation of the users because of the organizational structure. And it tends to be a model that if it's socialized and it's understood, and participation from the community. And so it is a model that it tends to be accepted by the communities. So the disadvantages of this is that without political activities, there can be very slow growth, especially in resource management. It can difficult the investment that is done in this sector. And it's very important for the optimization and the effectiveness of this system. So later we have some models, for example, like mixed enterprise with 9%, the communal management where, for example, like Juntas de Agua. This is an example of how you see the information in the catalog. We try to make it the most synthesized and easy to digest. You have heard us talk about Polos, and this is the organization. And this is some of the information that you can see in each of the different models. And the juntas are based on communitary participation. their limitations are a lot, but there are a lot of success story as well. For example, like Polos, it depends a lot on the involvement of the community, on the board of directions, and the participation of the board of direction, and the technical capacity of the participants. In this process, we had a very beautiful part of interviews and exchange of experience. We saw a lot of convergence points. There were many. Uh, we had around 12. Here we synthesized some for you. One is very important, the transition to a new model, a new management model based on a self-analysis and the opportunities. Um, Many times, some providers change to different models, to different management models. Even in the catalog, we have some points on when you should consider transitioning to a different management model. Another important part was the human resource in experience and the permanence. We saw that many of the providers had managers that had been there for many, many years and had achieved continuous capacity building and growth in the sector, and that had made a difference in many of the advancements that you could see throughout the time. So the permanence and the experience definitely shows an impact in the operation of the providers. And I think this was very beautiful part for us because you see very committed professionals with offering a service and facing a lot of challenges throughout their stories as providers. Another one is the technical and financial support from national or international sources. Many of the providers that we were able to talk to had been benefited by international funding, and in our experience, especially with the juntas de agua, it has been the way to support them technically, um, having this funding. And also reinvestment in the continuous improvement of the system. We always mention optimization because that is fundamental part, especially when there's an intention to grow, when you have an interest to continue improving the way you operate and the way the system operates. And now with so much technology, also to implement new technology to facilitate different processes and systems. So that has also been key. And I think in a way, the way that is maintaining these managers motivated inside in their jobs. And then here we have in West End in Roatan. If you don't know, it's a community, a very touristic community in Roatan in the Bay Islands in the Honduran Caribbean, where Polo started first working many years ago, and with different support and different types of support. And well, these are the results. And you can see them. It's 99% of the homes are connected to this service. And we have good news that in the next year, we hope that this increase. Also, the coverage of the treatment plant. Also, thinking Solitude and the vast investment, we said that it is the treatment plant is operated by Polos. We are avoiding 34 million gallons of wastewater to reach the ocean and have having the positive impact that we are looking for every time we do the water quality tests in the Bay Island areas, especially in the Half Moon Bay areas, which is a blue flag beach. And just this week, tomorrow, there is the ceremony to give them this recognition. And thank you for the committee, in a community level where everybody are where all of them are the ones that execute this plan, and we can reach to have this recognition and ensure, most of all, ensure that the people can enjoy the beach and be there in a safe way. And of course, for us and for the reef. And different changes that the water treatment plant has had. You can see the solar panels in the first picture, in the one in the top. Well, some of the changes that they have done throughout history to reduce costs, operational costs. And as you can see, it's a small plant and it's very, very close to the water, to the coast, in the coastal area. Next. Thank you. Other initiatives, one that we are also working with different, either starting, continuing, reinitiating. I think sometimes that all of us can talk about this very, very quickly and very concise, but there is a lot of story behind all of that we do. And it is not only our effort as an organization, but also from all of our partners that are here with us, and that face the challenges, in Coxenho. That is the municipality in Roatan. We have organized different efforts from diagnostics of the sanitation and water services that are managed by the municipal provider. And they have a direct model through the gathering of data of this database for the users, where we developed interviews, and we took information of GPS location. Here you can see the cover of the document and some maps of the information that we were able to generate. And all this information has helped us as a baseline for the work and governance with this municipal provider. We continue working because one of the things that we would like to see is to see this transition to a different management model that permits a better administration, both technical and administrative, of the resources. And then currently we are starting this month. Yes, we are still in February. We are starting a consultancy with the objective of carrying out an evaluation, a deep evaluation of the governance of water and sanitation of all the service providers and the financial infrastructure of the coastal communities in Honduras, specifically in these areas, hopefully to improve water quality and reduce contamination that reaches the Mesoamerican Reef, but also with the objective of creating a project folder of investments that can be carried out, and to knock on doors for the cooperation and give them as tools for mayors for managing and being able to improve the management and have a baseline on what it would cost to have these changes in this aspect. Here, I always want to add that we talk about we are very, very interested in sanitation, but we always talk about water and sanitation because in the end it's the whole package. So for service, for administration, for operativity, for us, it's very important to see it as a package, because many times it's a lot easier to talk about water, to start talking about water related topics, especially in the government and in local governments, than talking about sanitation. So sometimes it's easier to have these conversations. So this is all from me. And now we just want to show you a video. I think that, well, the organization did, the BBC, and it shows very, very well all the layers that we have showed today, starting from the communal part and the role that all of these actors have, as well as the water quality collection and impulsating water quality and water management services and strengthening these service providers. So here is.
I am in line to many generations of island-born citizens. My personal connection to the ocean and the reef is something that I was born into.
Ever since I was little, I would go swimming in the ocean. As a little kid, my first recollection is this little fish swimming around me and like basically guiding me to that reef. Like, it just blows your mind. We have to protect it.
I was born and raised in Roatan. People come here from all over the world just to see that reef. Whatever we do on land, it's affecting the coral reef. And if we don't take care of the sewage in the ocean, that becomes a problem. We knew that we had to do something about it.
Roatan is home. I remember when I was real young, we used the ocean to take care of everything. We had outhouses. I remember seeing the feces going by. Sometimes it would end up on the beach. It's not healthy having raw sewage just pumped into the ocean.
The moment I realized that I wanted to find a solution was after going on a dive and realizing that depletion was happening to this beautiful coral reef that we're so fortunate to live in. One of the things that we first did was getting everyone to realize the wastewater needed to be addressed immediately.
In 2013, we began marine water quality monitoring on the island of Roatan. What the data showed was that there was high contamination in the most populated areas around the island. Which makes sense, right? Because there's a lot of people living in one given area and there's not proper sewage treatment facilities, then all of that sewage will eventually make it to the ocean. It will kill the corals that live there, it will kill the fishes that live there. But we also need to think about our kids and ourselves because it can cause different diseases for humans. So after realizing the problem, it was clear that we needed sanitation infrastructure. That's when we started working with the local water board and Coral Reef Alliance.
This is headquarters for Water Association. that does the fresh water as well as the black water. The treatment plant was created, was built, was installed, and when Coral Reef Alliance came in, it gave us all the trust and the hope that we could continue. The next step was, how do we get rid of the black water?
Although the sewage treatment plant in the community of West End was built in 2012, the data didn't indicate the benefits of it because all the homes were not connected to it. So that untreated sewage from all the homes was still leaching out into the ocean. People were reluctant at the beginning because they didn't really understood the importance of it. But no one said to them, hey, you're killing your livelihood, like you're killing your reef, like you're killing your culture. No one said that.
Hello, come in.
So what we did, we went house to house. And we used the data to teach people what is happening in their backyard. And people were just in awe, like they couldn't believe what was going on. And that's where, knowledge really can change behavior.
People talk to each other within the communities. Once they realized that this was important to preserve the reef, the economy of this island thrives on tourism, and the reef is a huge part of that.
Since this process has began and all the homes have been connected to the sewage treatment plant, what we're seeing is amazing results. The water quality in West End has improved exponentially. And you can see that in the environment. Like you can smell it when you walk around the community.
Recently, we had a pod of dolphins come in to Half Moon Bay. So one of the dolphins could give birth to a baby. And my thought is that, you know what, we're doing something right.
West End has shown that a proper management system in terms of wastewater is possible, and it has to be replicated.
Being a part of this is taking me back to my father's advice, in which he said, you have to be part of the solution. If not, you become part of the problem.
Thank you very much to Tanya, Pamela, and Antonella for this very detailed and very valuable lecture lessons, and on a topic of high interest. And we were very expectant, and we're very glad to be able to hear about this work that is done multi-sector. And I'm going to open the space for questions. We have some in the chat, so if there are any more, you can please write them down. First, we start that arrived through our social media that was asking if the sargassum is included into or contemplated in the macroalgae. No, sargassum, we don't take sargassum into account. Actually, one of the hypotheses for excessive phosphorus was sargassum, but we didn't do any analysis directly related to sargassum. And if the question is related to the health index, no. These macroalgae, we are just taking into account the benthic algae. Jorge Herrera mentions that in the list of partners, when you started mentioning them all, he didn't identify any academic groups or Yes. The partners that we put there are the implementing partners that were actively collecting samples. Um, all the other departments, we do have all academics. We have talked with University of Belize, but because of different procedures, it ended up not happening. But you're very, very welcome. And the more partners we have, the better. And we hope that we can collaborate. And this is what we do. We create alliances, and we need to take advantage of all the knowledge and all the people that are wanting to work for the reef. We also ask if the protocol has methods for calibration or standards or reference samples. Yes to all of them. We have calibration for standards. We have free access protocol, and it's both in Spanish and English, and it's coralmap.org. The idea is that we always can validate these results and make sure that they are constant and precise, both in the lab and in the field. There's also a comment regarding TRIX is not a water quality index and not and mostly to the trophic level of the water. This TRIX level doesn't ensure the units that you are talking about are milliliter per liter. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more into this. Yes, very correctly seen. We are now working in generating an index for the MAR, but that is just step by step. We also want to review other water quality indices, like ECAM, that comes from Colombia, and that one also has oxygen in milligrams per liter. And we know that this trophic index is not really a water quality. But the reason why we decided to use it is because it is a commonly known index and people can relate to them. And this one can show the impact um, on the nutrients that should be oligotrophic. So we also assume when we started taking data that the values were going to be a lot lower. And actually, in the three countries, I'm not sure of Mexico, we needed to change our reactives calibrate because we needed to take into account higher values than the ones we had considered in the lab because we did not expect these unusually high values. So it's part of the results as well, these high values that we found. I don't know if there was a question on oxygen as well. I think it was that same question. Um, the oxygen on itself is not indicator on its own, and it's better to show it as oxygen saturation. Yes, we know that oxygen milliliters per liter is affected by temperature and salinity. Actually, in the tricks, we are using saturation, but we also take into account the percentage of saturation. For this case, we are reporting in milligrams per liter. We think that this is a little bit more understandable for the community, and also because of the values that we had used before in the 90s were used in this unit. So it's important to be able to see the change through time. Jorge Herrera asks if um, there are sampling from the sources of water, like Mexico and Belize in the underground waters, to have a little bit of context of the sources of these waters. Um, we know that, for example, there is water sources that are very far. In Mexico, we did an initial phase where we did take water, fresh water, and from different sites. However, obviously, that is a project of a huge magnitude, very, very costly. And to be able to optimize these costs and to be able to compare throughout the whole all three countries, we decided to stick to salt water, and we would love to be able to integrate all of the underwater water systems. And we know that this is not a project this is a project that is just beginning. And the more partners that we can get, the better. And considering this, what we are trying to do is that having some partners that are not specifically in these logos, partners of other type, for example, like WWF, they also had a similar project taking into account rivers in all of the MAR from the 4 countries. And the samples are very far away, but we are now trying to see how we can make them compatible and see if there's any correlation or any relationship between these information, or for it to work as a baseline where we can take all of these things into account that weren't taken care of before. Thank you. We have very little time for some other additional questions. Jorge Herrera, what is the address where you can see the protocol? Also, we also want to invite you to answer our feedback forms, to tell us what you thought about this webinar and the little details that we can take into consideration. I now give the word back to our colleagues from Coral. Yes, you can see the protocol in coral.org. We have a whole section of clean water for coral reefs, and it's like a toolkit, and you have a guide. And if we have a little bit more time, I can add it onto the chat. All of our online seminars are recorded through the platform, both on Facebook and on our webpage. So we are inviting you to see them again and listen to them again. And this very valuable tool, and it will be available both in English and Spanish, so you can see it again. Thank you, Antonella. She has shared the PDF for the protocol. Also want to comment that this is a live document. We are constantly updating it. We are now expanding our sites to the north coast of Honduras, and it's very different to what we saw in the Bay Islands. And we need to work with local apartments for this specific zone. So we are always open for more recommendation and communication and improvements. Well, once again, if we don't have any more questions, we want to thank you deeply for Coral Reef Alliance for this time, for this explanation. And I know that many interesting conversations will arise from this content. Thank you for everybody that participated, and we are expectant to have new alliances and new opportunities that might present themselves, that arise from these shared experiences, so that we can continue working for the health of the Mesoamerican Reef. Thank you very much to the team of Coral Reef Alliance, and for each one of you for joining us here. Thank you. Thank you.